My name is Monk Rowe, and we are filming in Los Angeles today for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive. I'm very pleased to have Bill Holman with me. Welcome.
Thank you, Monk.
I started writing a list of the people you've arranged for, and I got writer's cramp.
Yeah.
It's really quite an amazing list of performers and bands and assignments. And did you have an inkling in your teen years that you would ever be making a career out of writing?
Oh, I used to fantasize about it. I had a band in high school, and I kind of got interested in the arranging process, but I lived in a small town, and there were no professional musicians around there, except for one guy who was a piano player, and he played for the ladies' club meetings and things like that. And he was kind of a rake, you know, and not too well thought of in the community, you know, so he was our only professional, and I had no way to find out how to go about making an arrangement. You know, remember I just jumped in and made an introduction to a stock arrangement one time.
Okay.
And that was as far as I got into it. Then I did a spell in the Navy and came back and went, I was studying engineering in the Navy, and I came back and went to UCLA to continue my arranging, or my engineering. Did I say I was studying arranging in the Navy?
No.
That's engineering.
Engineering,
yeah.
maybe, yeah.
Okay, and I went back to UCLA to continue that, and after one semester, I said, this is not really what I want to do.
Yeah.
So I transferred to a music school, and I had a lot of musical material, you know, band material and everything, because when I was a kid, the top 40 was all bands, you know, and jazz bands and commercial bands. So I had all this stuff in my head, and after I went to the school and learned a few the basics that had been hanging me up, I was writing charts within a month or so, and so it became a reality. But getting back to your question, yeah, I did think about it, but I had no idea it could ever come to pass, you know. Yeah.
Well, in this small town with one musician, where did you get your musical tastes from?
The radio, yeah. All day they played bands. And, you know, some good and some bad, but you get to hear everything and make your own choice, you know, what you like.
Yeah.
And so that a lot of people, when they're starting out cold in music, have to somehow get their own conception together without having all that background, you know. It must be very difficult, you know, to learn the vocabulary without having heard it all before. But that end of it was pretty easy for me.
Who were your favorites when you were listening to the radio? Let's say, 1940, and you were about 13.
Oh, there were a lot. I always liked Basie's band, Benny Goodman. I was starting to get into Woody Herman, Charlie Barnett, and of course Duke. I didn't understand Duke, though. It was a little deep for me. Basie's old band, you know, with Prez and all those guys, it was right out there, you know, this is us. So, and I never lost the love for that feel, you know, that really radical swinging that the Basie band did at that time. You know, it had a small band feel almost. You know.
Curious you used the word radical. Why would you say radical?
Well, I just meant utmost, or
the epitome.
Very
I don't
much,
know.
yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
I wasn't sure what you meant by that.
Yeah.
What about just the technical things about transposition and chord voicing and all that stuff? You learn some of that in college, or?
Well, when I went to this music school, those are the things that I learned. The things that I didn't have enough ambition or daring or whatever to find them out by myself, you know, when I was younger, just by trial and error, which is what a lot of guys did.
Yeah. How were you able to hear what you wrote? When was the first time that you had an opportunity?
When I went to that school,
Okay.
because they had a what they called a dance band and a studio orchestra and stuff like that, so you can hear everything that you did, which is really important, you know, because it doesn't do you any good to just sit home and write charts and never hear them.
Right.
You don't know what works and what doesn't.
I guess that was the beauty of Ellington's situation. That
Yeah,
he could
next day.
next day.
Well, that's partly why I started my band, you know,
Mhm.
in the 70s. So it's, for years I'd been writing charts and either taking them down to a rehearsal or putting them in the mail and sending them somewhere, and never seeing the music again and not hearing it until I heard this band's particular interpretation of what I'd written. And a lot of times it wasn't exactly what I had in mind. So I thought the simplest thing is to start my own band, which Woody Herman told me to do one time. I griped at him about a tempo, and he said, well, what we tell the arrangers that are unhappy, we tell them to start their own bands. So that's what I did.
That must be an interesting situation where, I mean, by the time you finish a chart, you must know exactly. I mean, you have your own conception of the tempo and the whole thing,
Yeah.
and then to hand it over, and the guy counts it off at a different tempo.
Yeah.
And you're hoping that it works, I guess, at that speed.
Well, usually I don't have any idea that's what they're doing until I hear it on a record or on a broadcast or hear the band in person. But it's very hard to get your conception of a piece of music across to somebody else without actually going there and doing it yourself.
Yeah.
If he reads it, he looks at a metronome mark, and even if he gets the mark right, the feeling might not be the same.
Well, it looks like one of your first assignments with Charlie Barnett. Were you still in college at that time?
Let's see. No, I got out of school I think around 1950, and this was 51 when I worked with Charlie. He wasn't really buying charts then, but I had this chart that I wrote for him, and I put it in the book, and after a while, I guess the guilt got to him or something, and he paid me for it, but he was kind of winding his career down at that time, and he didn't want to invest a whole lot more into it. So,
Right.
but then later in the 50s, I did a couple of albums for him for the Everest label. So I got to write for him finally, you know.
Were you making more money with your instrument or more money with your pen?
Well, let's see. After Barnett, I joined Kenton's band, and I was writing for him, but I wasn't writing very much for the first 9 months or so. I couldn't figure out what to write for the band, so I was making more money as a player then.
Yeah.
Then after I left him, came back to L.A. and I guess at first I was doing more playing than writing, and then gradually, after a couple of years, I think the more writing.
Who did you like? Did you have some influences as far as jazz players that you tried to emulate?
Players?
Yeah.
Yeah. Coleman Hawkins, I think, was the first one, or Lester Young, I guess. Lester and Hawk about the same time. Because I mentioned all those Basie records that I heard, and I knew that guy was good. Then, see, Dexter Gordon. After I got out of the service, I heard a lot of Dexter, and then Al Cohn and Zoot Sims, and Sonny Rollins, and Coltrane I loved. I can't say he was much of an influence outside of just making me feel good, but because I never, the way he played was not my
Right.
thing naturally, you know,
Uh-huh.
so, but I sure appreciated him.
Yeah. He always made me feel a little on edge, actually.
Yeah, well, I liked his earlier things before he got into the sheets of sound
Uh-huh.
and like that. When he was joined Miles in 1955, and I heard that band, I just nearly came out of my
I
skin.
guess so. Yeah. With Cannonball and
No, it was just
this
a
is
quintet then.
pre-Cannonball. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of years was that way until
Mhm.
that kind of blue and that stuff came
Right.
with the sextet.
Yeah.
But Coltrane really turned everybody around in
Mhm.
the middle 50s.
Yeah. How does an arranger, in his early career, get a reputation? How did you get a reputation as an accomplished writer?
Well, I wrote for Stan Kenton. It's a very difficult thing now to do that, to get a reputation, because there's no bands. The only people that can afford to have bands are writers themselves, except for the commercial bands, you know, Dorsey Band and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So there's not that opportunity to write for a band and get your stuff recorded and get a reputation that way. So it's tough. Well, it's tough for players too, because
Yeah.
you just have to. A jazz player has to go to New York and bang his head against the wall for so many years, and maybe he'll get that reputation.
Right.
Maybe not. But it's hard for writers too.
Can you put into words what it was that after the 9 months with Kenton made you feel, okay, now I think I can start to write for this band? What did you need to do to match his style?
Well, the thing that helped me the most was playing Jerry Mulligan. He wrote about 10 charts for Kenton when I joined the band in '52. And playing those things every night was the big impetus, you know, because that was the first big-time arrangements that I'd played, you know. It was on, well, of course, Barnett, but, I mean, guys of my generation. You know, Mulligan was the first guy that I had a chance to play, and that was a great education. Because I could see how the things went over with Stan. Stan didn't really like a lot of them, but he liked Youngblood and a few others, and so in assessing what I'm going to do for Stan, I was able to see his reaction to these other things. Kind of figure, well, don't do that, whatever you do. You know, but maybe this you can do, yeah.
At least your chances are improving now
Yeah, yeah.
That it won't get the axe.
Yeah.
What would a band like Kenton's pay for an arrangement in those days?
$75.
Would you do these when you were on the road, or anywhere? right?
Wherever, yeah.
Wherever.
A lot of them were on the road. A lot of them were here when we had some time off. We didn't have a whole lot of time off, though, because when I joined the band, we left for the road in March of '52 and didn't get back till December. And then we went out again in January, and aside for a little vacation I took in June, I guess I was home, I don't know, 3 weeks or something like that. The band was out until December again. So it was a full-time gig. But when you're young, you can take it.
Yeah. Did he have? Were you on the band when he had the? Didn't he have a string section for a while?
Yeah. I think they called that the Innovations in modern jazz
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
So they call it the Innovations Orchestra. That was, he did 2 tours with that, I think in '48 and '49. That was before me. Then in 1951, the end of 1951, a lot of people left. Bob Cooper and Bud Shank and Shelley Mann and, you know, Shorty Rogers, a lot of the stars left. So when he reorganized the band in early '52, that's when I joined. But no strings.
He certainly generates discussion about where he fits in jazz history. How do you feel about his place?
Well, there's a definite place there. It's, I don't know, not being a historian, it would be hard to say where it fits, but he did a lot of things. He gave opportunities to a whole lot of people that were able to go on their own, you know, and have good careers. A lot of his music, well, I liked very much, you know, in the late 40s, the things that Rowe was doing. I liked those a lot at the time. Then later, you know, in the 50s when I was into it, I liked more swinging things, you know. So that's why I wasn't able to write for him for a while, because I didn't want to write things like Pete was doing. I didn't know how. And I knew Stan didn't want Count Basie charts, so I was trying to find a middle groove there. But at the time that I joined, in fact, Gene Rowland got me an interview with Stan on the strength of something I'd done in school, which was a 12-tone blues and very contrapuntal and all that. And Rowland said, "My God, this is what Stan was looking for."
Sounds like right up his alley.
Yeah. Oh, you know him?
12-tone
You know him?
blues.
Oh, I think everybody writes a 12-tone blues at some point. I think Leonard Feather did. So it turns out Stan was looking for a contrapuntal kind of approach, and that was what I was doing, you know. So we had a connection right away.
Yeah.
I just had to figure out how to make it work.
When you write a chart, let's take that one for example. Can you hear that thing in your head pretty much complete?
The Rowe? The
arrangement as a whole.
Oh, well, you hope so. I'm sure when I wrote that, I didn't hear it, because that's something you learn over time, is how to hear the thing. A lot of times when you're a student, you're just doing things and say, well, I'll see if this works, or what's this going to sound like. Or hopefully you know what the chart's going to sound like, unless you're trying something new, and then you just hope it works. But sometimes you get surprised and something sounds different from what you imagined it, and you say, well, okay. Then you have to decide whether it's okay or not.
Are there a couple Kenton arrangements that you feel stand out as your most successful?
I did one on Stella by Starlight that featured Charlie Mariano on alto sax, and that came off very well. And I also did around the same time, this is 1955, I did one on Stompin' at the Savoy, which has kind of stood up. We still play it with my band now. So I think those two stand out to me.
I have a couple things that I want to play for you. Actually, I think it's a bit early for that, because I want to ask about the first time you had quite a list of singers here that you've arranged for also. And when was your first experience doing a chart for a singer?
It must have been around the middle 50s for Peggy Lee. Believe in starting at the top. And I was, I was really scared, because I had kind of a crush on her since 1942.
Oh, that's nice.
But she's, she's a great singer, and so I really took it easy writing the charts. I didn't put a whole lot in there, afraid to get in her way. And she told me later, after a couple of years, she says, the thing I really like about your charts is that all the stuff you leave out. So I guessed right on that one.
There's a lesson there.
Yeah.
Rests are good.
Yeah.
Peggy Lee, Buddy Rich, Sarah Vaughan,
Yeah.
Onita O'Day, quite a long list here. And all this time, you're playing also. You're playing
Well,
in the different bands and.
Yeah. I stopped doing studio work in the early 60s when all the commercial people started requiring saxophone players to play flute.
Mm.
And since I was writing and everything, I figured I didn't really want to take time to learn to play the flute. So that kind of went down. And then in the 60s, I had some surgery on my jaw, and my lip, they cut some nerves, and my lip lost its strength, you know, so I just quit playing then for about 15 years, till I started my band again, and I wanted to be able to participate. So I got the horn out, and it kind of worked. The lip had come back somewhat, so I was able to play a little bit. And a few years later, I had some dental implants put in, and they blew the nerve again. So currently, I don't have a whole lot of strength in my lip, but I'm working on it.
Yeah.
Because I still want to be able to participate with the band.
Now, leading and organizing a big band, it's got to be quite time-consuming, I would think. Do you have a core of guys that you can count on to be at a certain place at a certain time?
Yeah, the whole band does that. It took a few years to get it established, you know, but now all the guys, if they can't make a rehearsal, they send their own subs, they call their subs, and I don't have to, you know, call an hour before the rehearsal trying to find a trumpet player or something.
Oh, that's good.
So it kind of runs by itself now, but it took, the first few years was really hairy, because guys would call up the last minute, you know, oh, I can't make it. And, so, but it was all that, the visions of doing all the phoning and the organizing and finding a place to rehearse that kept me from doing it before. But a friend of mine talked to a club owner. The friend is Don Pystrup. He's a writer too. I don't know. He talked to the owner of Dante's out in North Hollywood and said, "Why don't you give Bill a Sunday night, every Sunday night with the band, you know?" And he had a copyist who would work very inexpensively, and so they kind of laid this band on me, and after a while the club gig vanished, but we decided we'd keep the band going anyway, and we've made a few records and done some good gigs, and so it's been a good time.
Yeah. 1960, Bill Holman's Great Big Band. And was Big Band in Jazz Orbit 58? Was that one of your first records under your own
that
name?
was the second one. Yeah. Well, I did an octet record for that Kenton Presents series in 1954, but that was the second big band thing. I did one for a company called Choral, which was a subsidiary of Decca in 1956 or 57, I guess. And Orbit was 58, and Great Big Band was 1960.
Did you do much writing for the studios, as far as film music and?
I did some in the 50s when they were using a lot of jazz scores, and especially TV shows. And I worked with Leith Stevens on a couple of things. He was a very good Hollywood film composer. But I've never gone into actually composing for movies. I did a couple of grade C movies in the 50s.
Grade C, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever see them?
Yes, one of them made TV, and it comes out occasionally. It's rerun. And,
Can you tell me what it is?
It's called Swamp. It was called Swamp Women.
Swamp Women with score by Bill Holman.
Yeah,
Yeah,
terrible music.
I'm going to watch it.
I don't think they even play it on TV anymore. Then the other one never even made it to TV.
Well, what kind of instructions did you get with a film like that? What do they give to you for?
Well, how this first film came together was a theater, a guy in the South that owned a string of theaters had a bunch of color footage of the Florida Everglades, real nice pictures. And he brought them out here and asked Roger Corman if he could make a film around this footage, you know, get a story written and everything, just so this guy could use this. And it did. It was about a gang of girl jewel thieves that escape from prison and go back to reclaim their swag, you know, their buried treasure. And they had to go into the Everglades,
Okay.
and they'd do some of them, and then they would shoot some of this scenery. And so, and part of it took place in Mardi Gras in New Orleans. So it had to have a Dixieland. Part of it had to be Dixieland. Part of it had to be kind of big band, and part of it had to be spooky Everglades music. You know.
Yeah.
So that was the only instruction I got. It turned out I wrote, you know, about a half hour too much music, because the director wasn't there to spot it with me. I spotted it with the music editor. And so, you know, it's part of the learning process.
Can you recall what you got paid for that?
$800.
All right.
Yeah.
I guess you can. Let me play a little piece here. This is kind of going backwards chronologically, I think, and for some of the music you've done over the years. Whose idea was it to go to the Beatles for a
That was
tune?
mine.
Yeah.
That tune had been in my head for a long time. And I said, someday I'm going to make a chart on that.
Yeah.
And finally I just got around to doing it. I did it in one night because I'd been thinking about it so long, you know, that I had things kind of worked out in my head. And I was afraid Buddy wasn't going to like it because he wasn't a big fan of rock, you know. And he flipped over it, you know, and he made it into a very hot piece.
Yeah, and not that many things in his repertoire were in sixes or threes either. I don't think. Maybe he really enjoyed playing that groove.
Yeah, I'm sure he did, from the way he played on it.
Yeah.
You know, he sailed into it.
Yeah. Can you recall what you got paid for that chart?
No. I think at that time it was around $350 or something like that.
I'm just curious as to how those kind of things work if you're contracted out. Have you had an occasion where, not including your own band, where a band leader would call you and say, I want something original, something that no one else is going to have right now? And how do you price those kind of projects?
Well, you're depends on who you're working for one thing. You know, if it's a pop act, that's one thing. If it's a jazz guy, it's another thing. If it's a record company paying for it, that's another thing. And so there's several different things that go into it, plus your own price, you know, what you feel that you're able to get for them. And it's always less than it should be, but you take all those considerations and you give them a price, and then he says something like that, oh, that's great, I was afraid it was going to be more, you know.
Oh, that's not what I meant. That was just the first alto part.
Yeah, right.
That's tough.
Mostly it's, oh, I can't afford that.
Yeah, right. Well, this particular thing, I think, goes back quite a ways. Ringing any
No, I figure I wrote it, but I don't know what it is. I did a lot of charts in the 50s, during the West Coast Jazz, because people would have an artist they wanted to record. They say, okay, we'll do it on such and such a day, call an arranger, And
Yeah.
so you'd write 4 tunes, and there were so many of them, it all kinds of runs together.
Yeah. Well, this is called Zigzag, and it was on an album that I found with a lot of different people, but it was under your name. It said Bill Holman and Zigzag. Actually, the album, I'll show it to you later. And
Turn it up.
yeah, I think there was an alto player and yourself on it.
Huh.
You have that record over there, Tim? It's got those saxophones all over it.
It sounds like Charlie Mariano and Sam Noto. I hope I don't play at this tempo.
I think you do, actually. That's it. Here we go. Could be that you've never even seen it before.
Yeah, well, it was probably under somebody else's name
Right.
that I did it, and they just changed it to
It's
me,
like a-
because I remember every record I did for
Now, does
myself.
this sound like you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You know, that sounds like, to me, when I listened to a few things you did, really sounded like I could tell you're an arranger. Because I can hear you
What do you
playing.
mean by
I
that?
can hear you playing like lines and then repeating them and variations that I don't. Maybe it's after the fact, but that you may think of certain melodic things, having spent so much time writing them, that they come out in your playing too.
Uh-huh.
Well,
Possible.
that's just an opinion.
Yeah, okay.
Must have been a 76. You did some writings for Zoot Sims.
Yeah.
Yeah, was that enjoyable?
Yeah, well, he was one of my real dear friends after we were on Kenton's band together. And, I had really worshipped his playing a long time before then.
Mm-hmm.
But we got a chance to hang out. We drove in the same car on the road, and it was just really nice to get to know him. So I'd always wanted to be able to record something with him, and I never thought how it could happen, because people have a tendency to wait for somebody to call them for a project or something. So I finally decided, well, maybe I can get this project going myself. So I asked Zoot, and he said, sure. And I called up Norman Granz, and I said, Norman, I always wanted to do something with Zoot Sims, and, with a band. So I was thinking of a big band, but Norman said, well, how about a smaller band, 10 or 12 pieces. And that's how that came about. And I was really happy to be able to do that, and to finally get to work with my old pal.
Mm-hmm. Hawthorne Nights,
Yeah.
is that the name of it?
Hawthorne is a suburb of L.A., and that's where Zoot grew up.
I see.
So that was the, romantic Hawthorne nights.
Yeah. Tell me, is the term cool jazz, not to kind of switch subjects here, but supposedly a West Coast thing. Did you do you feel that there's a style of West Coast playing that is different than East?
Yeah. Mostly I think it's because of the people that are here, not because there's anything in the water or anything that makes it that way, but
Mm-hmm.
most jazz players go to New York because that's the place for a jazz player to make it. Mainly players come to LA to work in the studios, whether they're actually able to do it or not. That's the motivation for a lot of players being here. And there's a lot of guys that play in the studios that can play good jazz too, but they're not jazz players. That isn't what they do for a living.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a difference there. Of course, that cool thing in the 50s just kind of generated itself, because after Mulligan started his quartet, and he had a kind of a cool approach to that, and I don't know who started the word cool. I was on the road at that time with Kenton for the first 2 years of that.
Uh-huh.
But when I came back to town, I found that cool was the operative word, and counterpoint was the next operative word. The record producers found out about counterpoint because somebody told them that's what Mulligan was doing with the quartet.
Okay.
So they said, well, yeah, we're going to do this record with so-and-so, and would like you to write the music and try to do some contrapuntal things.
Oh, they got a music word to use.
Yeah.
And make it cool at the same time.
and find that then guys were starting to write Bach-type fugues, and calling it jazz, just because it was contrapuntal, and it got to be ridiculous.
Mm.
The thing that disturbed me about that scene the most was they decide to record a guy, and they hire an outside arranger to write the music. The arranger brings the music into the date, and that's the first time that the artist has seen the music. It has nothing to do with him, except there's spots in it for him to play.
Yeah.
Now, most of the guys that record do their own music, which
Mhm.
I think is a much healthier thing.
Yeah. Because otherwise it's a pretty contrived situation.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
trying to second guess what's going to sell.
And the guy can't play his best because he's just learning the music. He's reading chords off of a sheet of music instead of hearing it, which, if you write the thing yourself or you play it on the gig for a few months, then you can play jazz on it. But just look on a chart, you can construct a beautiful solo if you're that good at reading charts, but it could be much better if you're hearing it.
Right.
Too much emphasis on on eyes in music anyway, and not enough on ears. Especially, in the jazz education thing, they're educating these thousands of kids every year, and most of it they learn through by eye. It's I don't know what to do about it, because like we said before, that the chance to learn, on the job, where you learn to hear things, doesn't exist anymore. So it's hard. I learned how to play jazz at jam sessions.
Good statement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jazz has been kind of elevated, in one sense, to a pretty an art form, but I'm not sure that it's the opportunities for it are not rising with that.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what happens to all those guys that take jazz education.
Yeah.
Some of them become teachers, a few of them become professionals, but there's a whole lot that don't.
Tell me how the recording with Natalie Cole came about was, almost 9 years ago, 9 years
Mhm.
ago.
Well, the producer, who was her husband at the time, just called me and said, come out to the studio where I'm working and we'll talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked, and he wanted to know about some players to use, and to talk to me about the music. They were mostly, oh yeah, that was the Nat Cole album,
Yeah.
and they were things that Nat had done. So it turns out what he wanted for, I think he wanted me to do 4 charts, were almost copies of the charts that Nat had done. In fact, one of them was a chart that Billy May had written for Nat. It was almost note for note in like a slightly different key that I did it for Natalie. Then there were 2 others in that first album that David Foster called me to do, and he just said, "Go ahead, you got it," which are naturally a little more fun.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed getting to know her and getting to hear her. I think she's really a good singer. Got a jazz feel with a little of that Dinah Washington
Uh-huh.
stuff in there.
Were you in on the recording sessions?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I conducted the band.
Oh. Thanks for saying that, because that was something I meant to ask about, is that not all arrangers must be great or capable conductors. How did you learn to conduct? Was it something you did in school also? And
Well, things that are in tempo, dance band or jazz band charts, the conducting is a kind of a grand word for it, because what you do is get them started and get them stopped. And you kind of give a little bit of shading if they need some help, but supposedly all the dynamics are marked on the page, and good studio players are very good at picking up
Right.
stuff like that. So there's really, unless you got something that's out of tempo or with strings or something, it's not much to it.
uh-huh.
I did learn to conduct strings in the late 60s. I was doing some what they call sweetening for pop records. I worked with the Association and the Fifth Dimension and Diana Ross, and I got to work with strings. That was the first chance that I'd worked a lot with strings. I'd done some with Peggy Lee, but very little bit. And so that kind of got me into that. And
If you were writing a chart or a string chart for the Fifth Dimension, did you get a recording of the tune that was like the rhythm track or something?
yeah,
So, did it have the vocals on it?
yeah.
Okay, so that you knew pretty much where your spots were,
Mhm.
and
Yeah, that's the whole idea
Yeah.
of doing it that way. 'Cause, in the pop music, the record producer wants to have control over everything.
yeah.
So that's how they do it.
Uh-huh. Can strings swing?
Well, I would say not usually, but there is the Metropole Orchestra in Holland. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Metropole?
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
They got a string section. It's fairly good size. It's almost 30 strings. And they're very enthusiastic and very cooperative. Most string players don't want to hear about playing jazz. They don't even like contemporary classical music. But these guys can actually swing a little bit. They can do 2 types, the da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da kind of swing, and the straight 8 thing, which is a very subtle thing that a lot of horn players are not familiar with. But these guys do it, and they volunteer to do it. Because I had one thing that I just I didn't tell them it should be a jazz feel. I just told them to play it straight and this and that. And one of them said, well, you know, we could swing this a little bit if you wanted it. I said, sure. You know, and it worked
All right.
great.
Great.
But that's the only, well, some of the, what is the Kronos Quartet that
Yeah.
did the monk things?
Yep.
They got a good feel
Yeah.
in places.
Turtle Island
Yeah,
also,
yeah.
they swing pretty good.
Uh-huh.
But you said something about straight eighth notes. How do you mean that? I assume that it's slightly different from Mozart eighth notes.
Yeah. Well, what I usually consider real straight eighth notes is rock and roll, you know, because that ba da da da, that's very strict, you know.
Yeah.
But there's a way of like, you got a rhythm section that's playing a triplet feel, doom ba doom ba doo. A horn line goes ba da doo da doo da doo da doo da da da.
Yeah.
It's not quite straight, but it's not a triplet feel either. And it's unless you were raised with it, like I was, it's a very hard thing to pick up.
Yeah.
And these guys can do it.
That's good, because it makes for some nice contrast with
Yeah.
the rhythm section is
Uh-huh.
swinging and they're almost,
Yeah.
it's great. Had quite a list of Grammy nominations here. Are you surprised sometimes when you get a nomination for a particular arrangement that maybe if you had said, in the last year of the things I've arranged, I would have picked this one, and that's not what gets picked.
Yeah. Yeah, some of them, but you don't argue.
Right. Best Jazz Arranger, Jazz Times, 1990, 95, 98, and 98 in downbeat, too. Do you feel like you have to change your style to, I hate to use the term, keep up with the times, because you obviously have. Is there a conscious effort on your part to put things into your arrangement that reflect other music that's going on?
I use quotes sometimes, but they're usually quotes of older things. I don't keep up with the times so much as I keep up with myself, you know, because you're always progressing, you're trying to learn new things, and you don't want to do the same thing you were doing 20 years ago. And so that's kind of what drives me to do different things. There isn't much going on that I would want to use except other jazz writers, you know, and why do that? I mean, I'm too old to be going around being influenced by everybody, you know. I did that. I did that for
You've become the
years.
influencer.
Maybe.
I think so. So the days of, you know, stealing something from Annie album or, you know, something like that.
Odd you should mention that, because I did that exact thing. You know,
Yeah.
when he was writing for Barnett in 1949, I heard them down in Balboa, and they played that, what do you call it, Swell and Super thing that was takeoff on Keenan Peachy that Shorty had done for Woody. And I went home and tried to write a chart, something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what you do when you're young.
Yeah.
You try this, and you hear something you like, and you say, "Yeah, I want to try that." And then it just kind of gets absorbed into the whole conception, and it doesn't exist anymore in its original form, but it's there some way.
In your own band, not sure how to ask this question. Has electronics entered into the, even in the big band field? Actually, what I think I'm getting at is, does your rhythm section use electric instruments, and if so, does it change the sound?
No, we don't use.
Okay.
We use an amp on the bass, but that's
Right.
No, it's the jazz world. There hasn't been a whole lot of that, you know, in the straight-ahead jazz mainstream. Brookmeyer has used the synthesizers to really good effect in some of the things that he's done in Europe. But mostly for a straight ahead jazz band, electric sound doesn't fit. Doesn't have that grease that we like to say that humans have.
Yeah. Any rock or popular music that's come by your ears in the last 20 or so years that you really like?
Well, I got to mention the band, my favorite rock band.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a great flavor they had to their music, and I like the Rolling Stones too.
Mm-hmm.
Did you say jazz bands or?
Well, I was thinking of rock first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'd mention those two.
Yeah.
And then there's some other people, you know, that are more blues people, like Bonnie Raitt. I like her. And,
Yeah.
all the more blues-oriented people, mostly I like,
Mm-hmm.
because that's, you know, kind of a common connection with jazz.
How about jazz people?
Mm. So many.
What's that?
So many.
So many, yeah.
Well, Joe Lovano is one.
Hmm.
In fact, I'm going to be doing a project with him later this year.
Oh, great.
Uh,
What size ensemble?
a small band,
Uh-huh.
maybe 8, 10 pieces, something like that.
Do you ever know beforehand who else you're writing for?
In the group,
Yeah,
sometimes they tell me.
yeah.
Sometimes if it's a band, you know who's there.
Yeah.
But a lot of times you don't know.
Right. Is there a danger in writing something that you say, boy, I know this fellow's going to be on the date, and that he will play this great, but down the road someone else is going to be playing that thing.
Mhm. It happens. Yeah. It doesn't sound the way you thought it was going to.
But it sounded darn good the first time, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, who knows? Maybe this new guy puts a good
Yeah.
spin on it.
That's true. So let's say there's a young man who comes to you and says, I really want to get into the field of writing for jazz bands and so forth. Is there any kind of advice you can give to that person?
Well, I usually tell them to get a band together first thing, you know, and start writing and start listening to your charts, and you can get kind of a local reputation doing that. You know, if the band starts to sound good or your music starts to sound good. I don't know. Guys ask me mostly about getting work in Europe, you know, and I just say, well, make a tape, you know, make a cassette and start sending it out to these producers around there that work in the radio stations and where they have bands. They still have staff bands at these radio networks like they used to have here.
Wow.
And like the network in Cologne that I work for, they have a jazz band, they got a full symphony, they have a pop symphony, which is smaller, you know, 60 pieces, but the full symphony is over 100, I guess. And these people get paid every week.
How do they do that? Is it government
Yeah.
sponsored?
Yeah. And the people pay a tax on their radios and on their TVs. They support it.
I see. Wow, so you go over there almost every year?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Been doing it since 1980. And the bands are folding up slowly, you know, like the world is turning into the USA, you know.
Well,
They're finding better things to do with their money than have bands. I used to work in Zurich. They had a band there. I worked a couple of times with that. That's gone. And there used to be a band in Holland that I'd work for every time I went over there. They had a Monday night gig at a club, which was broadcast, and that got done away with. So in the Scandinavia, Sweden used to have a band that's gone now, and Finland, I was just there in November. They had a radio band, which is now freelance, and they work for the radio sometimes, but mostly they're working for the government doing concerts. You know, they're sponsored by the government now. Denmark still has a very good radio band. But this Metropole, the group that the Metropole belongs to, they have also a full symphony and an 80-voice choir, plus this 60-piece Metropole band. And it's also a steady gig.
Yeah.
Every day.
What does the Musicians Union do for you as an arranger? Do they set rates for arrangements or anything like that?
Yeah, they set they have scales for everything, you know. Usually after you get a reputation or something, you get over scale. But they have a scale for recording, which is, it's kind of a minimum. You can't really work for less than this, but you can work for more.
Uh-huh.
So and they're the recording and film things, everything that's electronic, they stick to the scales pretty closely. I mean, as far as not letting you work for less. On the live performance and everything, it's much hazier.
Uh-huh.
Because there's a lot of people, you know, that can't afford to pay scale, so, you know, some guys will work cheaper. But it's actually supposed to be a minimum.
Do you have a basement full of scores?
Yes, I have a whole house full. Scores and CDs are going to run me out of my house.
I'm wondering if you've been able to keep the original scores of most of the work you've done.
Up until about 1970, very few of them.
Oh.
Because before then, they weren't able to Xerox the oversized size sheets.
Yeah.
So you write a chart, you just give it to the band leader, and that's the last you see.
Oh, that's a shame.
Now I, make a Xerox of everything before I give it to the employer, whoever it was. So I have most of everything.
Mm-hmm.
I got some of the older things, the things that I recorded myself, and
yeah.
I'm trying to find some of the things that I wrote for Charlie Barnett for those 2 albums we did. I'm trying to locate those with the thought of maybe getting them published. So I talked to a guy who knows where they are, and he sent me a list, and there's quite a few of the scores in there that I hadn't seen for 30 years.
Who owns them?
Well, I guess Barnett's estate, but they gave part of them to a school, and they gave, I think, some of the others were just in Charlie's house, and they gave them to this guy to go back, and he lives in Philadelphia, and he's going to get them in shape again and put them in a collection somewhere.
Okay. Okay, here's a hard question. Have you ever had an occasion where you wrote something that came out just really badly, and the person you wrote it for just said, "Hey, no thanks, this doesn't work at all"?
Yeah. Was for a singer. They heard something. I think they heard the thing that the Fifth Dimension did, the Aquarius.
Uh-huh.
and they wanted something, a feeling like that, and they wanted it for an opener, and I did what I thought was it, and they took it on the road someplace. I don't know how these other players played it, you know. That,
Oh, yeah.
Again, my not being there to explain it might have made the difference, but they said it was a total egg, you know.
Oh,
So,
a total egg.
yeah.
So are you responsible for the Age of Aquarius, the bo-do-da-da-do-do-da, all that introduction stuff in that chart?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice stuff.
Uh-huh.
Wasn't, who's the fellow? Bones Howe?
Yeah.
Was he the guy, was he easy to get along with? Was he
Yeah,
a good producer for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He came on the scene in the 50s when the West Coast jazz thing was going on, and he was such a good mixer. He hadn't had enough work yet to be accepted into the union, so the union didn't want him to be a mixer. They actually didn't want him at the board, and all the musicians insisted on it, so they finally gave him some kind of a, I don't know, internship or something like that, where he's able to do that. And then it turns around to be a hot pop producer.
He had the ears then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, this has really been interesting to hear, you know, from the side of the guy who puts it all down on paper. I really appreciate you joining me, and I look at this list of people you've written for. It's like a legacy. You really, I think, in putting music down on paper is really a great thing to leave. Not just the recordings of it, but
Yeah, it's always going to be there, but
Yeah.
you know, a lot of those people are gone. It's probably never going to be performed again. But you know, I really feel blessed in being able to do that for a living. You know, and how much better does it get? I
yeah.
sit there at my piano thinking, this is what I do for a living.
From a guy from a town that had one musician of questionable
Yeah,
character.
right.
You did pretty well.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm sure you have some great pieces of paper coming in the future, too. What's your next project? You had something with Joe Lovano.
Yeah, that'll probably be in the fall.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to do a thing with the Metropole again in September, and with that radio network in Cologne, I think, in November. And we got a few gigs with the band. We're working on a summer tour in Europe for some of the festivals over there.
Oh, great.
And so that should really be a trip. It's a kick for me to. We did a 3-night thing in Vienna a couple of years ago, and to see these guys in a foreign country was really a trip for me. You know, to see them down there eating breakfast in this foreign hotel and watching them cope with all the stuff. So that's going to be fun. A friend of mine is having a 80th birthday celebration over in England in April, and about half the band is going to go over for that. And we'll do a little band concert and then get a few English guys and do a big band concert. And we got a gig in Salt Lake City in May. And we don't work around here much.
Yeah, you got to leave town.
Yeah.
You got to leave town.
Like I was telling Buddy before, I don't work much around here. Most of my work is someplace else.
Yeah. Well, the guys in New York say the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not that much. They go there to get established, and then they leave to work.
Yeah. Well, with all the jazz players in New York, you know, there would have to be 500 jazz clubs for them to all get gigs there.
And they're certainly not that.
No.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time today.
My
It's
pleasure.
been a real pleasure.
Yeah.
And appreciate it.
Yeah.